Imagine getting kicked out of the two biggest software clubs on the planet simultaneously. No Android, no Windows. Just boom, both doors slammed shut. For most companies, that kind of intense pressure would be game over. A Chinese tech giant is quietly killing Windows by doing the unthinkable. They built a brand new operating system entirely from scratch. And that system, which originally started out on phones, is now landing squarely on laptops.
So instead of folding up shop, they literally built a weapon to fight back. You know, everyone is always so focused on smartphone wars. Well, if Huawei's current momentum keeps up, the next major global tech war won't actually be fought over phones at all. It's going to be a battle over who controls the software running on your everyday desktop and laptop computers.
Let's trace back for a second and look at how incredibly fast those doors slammed shut. In May of 2019, the US government placed Huawei on the Entity List. Almost overnight, this broke their overseas Android phone experience because Google had to cut off access to Google mobile services. You know, that invisible engine that makes the Play Store, Gmail, and Google Maps actually work. And at the exact same time, a slower squeeze started hitting their laptops, severely restricting their ability to buy the Intel and AMD chips that Windows machines absolutely rely on. Microsoft suddenly went from a solid partner to a really shaky long-term bet.
Now, executives over there realized, pretty much instantly, that this wasn't just some temporary storm they could wait out. There was no magic phone call they could make, no check big enough to write that would fix it. This was a permanent geopolitical shift in how the global tech system treated companies caught between competing superpowers. They knew, right then and there, they needed a radical, from-the-ground-up plan for the next decade.
But here's what's fascinating. Instead of panicking, the leadership team looked at this crisis and essentially said, "See, we knew it." It was the ultimate proof of their darkest, long-standing fear that relying on software owned by a distant foreign power was a fatal business flaw. A single decision made all the way in Washington state had the power to break a business that took them decades to build. To them, this wasn't just a disaster, it was complete validation that they had to change absolutely everything.
Around this time, Chinese state media started throwing around a very specific term to describe the massive multi-year engineering effort Huawei was undertaking: self-controllable. So what does that actually mean? It means completely stripping out foreign code from their systems and building a technological foundation that they fully 100% own. Because the logic is simple. If you own your own platform, absolutely nobody else can ever take it away from you. Pulling this off, though, required some serious, next-level patience. Back in 2019, Huawei announced HarmonyOS. Now, critics totally laughed off those early versions as just a political PR stunt, mostly because underneath, it was still quietly running on an open-source Android foundation. But actually, the company was just playing a 5-year-long game. That early version was just a bridge. Over 5 years, they unglamorously stripped out every single piece of code that depended on Android, finally launching a completely independent ecosystem called HarmonyOS Next.
And they didn't stop at phones. They took on an incredibly high engineering cost to unify all these different devices into one smooth experience with absolutely no hidden Android layer running in the background. Just think about the sheer scale of that for a second. Getting a car dashboard, a smartwatch, and a laptop to all speak the exact same underlying language and share the same security rules, that is a monumental coding task that most companies wouldn't even dare attempt. But Huawei bet that owning the entire stack would eventually pay off. But there's always a catch, right? The massive cost here was sacrificing backward compatibility with old Android apps. They're essentially telling every single developer for the Chinese market, hey, you have to build a native HarmonyOS version of your app completely from scratch, or risk getting left in the dust. That is a colossal ask for developers, but it was the necessary price to pay to ensure nobody could ever yank their platform away again. Okay, so once that foundation was finally rock solid on their phones and tablets, they took this new, self-controllable weapon and pointed it squarely at a brand new target, the personal computer. We're talking about the very machines that Microsoft's Windows has dominated globally, pretty much without any serious competition for almost 40 years. 1 billion. Just let that staggeringly huge number sink in for a second. That is the amount of potential users in China's captive market. China happens to be the largest personal computer market in the entire world, and for decades they've relied almost exclusively on Microsoft Windows. When you have 1 billion users anchored to one foreign system, that level of dependence becomes a massive, glaring vulnerability the second international tensions turn into actual policy. This dynamic is creating a perfect storm right now. You have the geopolitical fear of relying on American software colliding head-on with a massive, forced upgrade cycle triggered by the end of Windows 10 support. Beijing is actively nudging state offices, hospitals, and banks to use this exact transitional moment to ditch Microsoft and switch over to homegrown alternatives instead. To actually make that massive enterprise switch happen, Huawei is heavily targeting the really boring everyday stuff. We're talking office software, custom file systems, and getting everyday printers to work seamlessly. Now, I know that sounds incredibly mundane, but it's absolutely crucial. It's the deciding factor in proving that HarmonyOS can actually handle complex enterprise environments without breaking the essential day-to-day workflows that hospitals, banks, and schools completely rely on.
Think about it like this. Imagine trying to build an entirely new car market from scratch, complete with local mechanics and totally new spare parts, simply because you decided you didn't want to rely on someone else's engine anymore. It's a massive undertaking. They aren't trying to beat Windows everywhere all at once. They're executing a really slow, patient siege, replacing Windows office by office, procurement contract by procurement contract, and using their huge domestic market to bankroll this totally new software ecosystem.
But here is the major twist that most of the headlines are totally missing right now. This technology, it is not stopping at China's borders. Yes, HarmonyOS was built to survive without American software, but Huawei has absolutely no intention of keeping it confined to their home turf.
Huawei is actively pushing these HarmonyOS computers into very specific regions where they've already had a massive foothold for a decade. For years, they've been supplying essential telecom and network equipment across places like Southeast Asia, the Middle East, parts of Africa, and Latin America. Now they're leveraging those deep, established relationships to push their brand new software. Now this is where it gets really fascinating. Notice the connection here between the network and the software. Generally speaking, whoever builds a network gets to shape what runs on top of it. Governments that already trust Huawei with their sensitive cell towers and internet infrastructure are finding that it's actually much cheaper and way less risky to just switch their desktop computers over to the exact same supplier.
What it boils down to is that Huawei is essentially selling these nations a geopolitical insurance policy. It's protection against ever being suddenly cut off. They're offering a fully functional operating system that literally cannot be shut down by outside foreign pressure. And let me tell you, that pitch resonates deeply with governments who have watched exactly what happens when a powerful country decides someone poses a risk.
And you know what the supreme irony of this whole timeline is? It's the ultimate boomerang effect. The very restrictions that were designed to weaken the company ended up acting as the origin story for a massive new competitor. That intense squeeze forced Huawei to create an entirely separate, self-sustaining technology stack that simply would not exist today if they hadn't been locked out in the first place.
So this independent tech stack isn't just about survival anymore. It's become a proven blueprint. Huawei has shown the world it is actually possible to build an independent chip supply, a phone OS without Android, and a computer OS without Windows. And other nations, who might be feeling a little nervous about relying on any single foreign power for their critical tech, are looking at this stack as a highly viable, ready-made alternative.
With the incredibly massive Chinese market bankrolling their software ecosystem, the exact same patient, multi-year playbook that successfully chipped away at Apple in the smartphone market is now aimed squarely at loosening Microsoft's global grip on laptops and desktops. It's a template that has already proven it can win against massive odds.
Now, to be clear, Windows isn't going to just vanish overnight. It obviously still runs the vast majority of computers on the planet. But the sudden existence of a proven, independent, completely sanctions-proof alternative means the global technology landscape is forever changed. The option is now sitting right there on the shelf. So, what do you think happens next? Does this new blueprint spread beyond China, or does Windows manage to hold on to its crown?